Hello, everyone. Thank you, Andrea, for the introduction. My name is Dicle Gülşahin. I'm from Turkey, but I've been living in the Netherlands for the past 2 years. Since last April, I've been working at Transartists, which is a part of Dutch culture, the International Cultural Policy Agency of the Netherlands. And in Transartists, I'm responsible as a mobility officer. And since last April, I've been working closely with the artist in residency programs. And today, and also I would like to mention a bit more about my past with ACMC. I was one of the lucky ones who were there for the first edition. And last year, I was there for the third edition in Groningen, and I did my presentation as a young graduate. So I'm really happy to be here as a young professional now doing my presentation. So today I'll be talking about the artist in residency programs affected by pandemic. This is going to be a practical presentation, and I'll inform you more about it. So now I would like to share my screen and start my presentation, which was the wrong button. Okay. Yeah. Okay, there's a small delay in my computer. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll just do like this. And I'll switch to here. So, artist residencies facing a pandemic. This is an explanatory case study, and it's based on my professional practice. Basically, I combined different researches that have been already conducted by the professional society, and it also includes quantitative data analysis as well. And I've done some observational research, and either I was a complete observer or I was a participant in these sessions, and I also observed. And these are basically symposium sessions organized by Transartists. So there are two questions I try to focus on. What did the COVID-19 pandemic change in the nature and practice of artist residencies? What has been done and achieved in terms of activity and organization of artist residencies to adapt to the consequences of the pandemic? So under the light of this brief introduction, I would like to go to the basic question of what are artist residencies. So there are variable names for that. Some call it artist residencies, some call it artist in residence programs, or we shortly call it AIR. It's basically a setting for artists where they are hosted and facilitated to practice their artistic activities in a predetermined time frame most of the time and under conducive conditions. This means that it starts, it ends, it mostly takes place in a predefined place, if not agreed differently. And there's no limitation for the form of AIR. It can be in different forms and length. It can involve different disciplines. And basically, any facilitation of artists in terms of artistic practice can be considered as a residency if the core idea matches with the whole phenomenon. And the earliest examples of artist residencies took place in 1900s, mostly in the Anglo-Saxon world. And today we see that it's a global phenomenon that is adopted by almost everywhere. And that's our basic domain in Transartists. So I would like to talk about my organization as well. Transartists is basically the largest database of art AIR programs in the world. We have more than 1,400 programs worldwide listed and featured, meaning that you can basically search and find out about the basic features and requirements of those programs on our website. It's an interactive database. It's a renowned guide for upcoming calls. All of our audience come there regularly in order to check the open calls that are close to approach. The basic idea of TransArtist is to research, facilitate, and create a networking base for AIR programs. Our mission is connecting residencies and artists. And in order to do that, we organize workshops and train artists about the AIR phenomenon in many aspects. And TransArtists was founded in 1997 in Amsterdam by Maria Toerlings as an independent organization. And under the light of the cultural policy of the Netherlands, it got merged with SICA, which was the International Cultural Policy Association in the Netherlands, together with Media Desk, which is a European Union component, and under the name of Dutch Culture in 2013. So since then, we've been a component of Dutch Culture, and we continue our activities under the organization. And today, TransArtists is run by a team of 4 employees, and everyone is part-time, and I'm one of them. And the office is located in Amsterdam, and obviously we now all work home. And you can actually visit our website at transartist.org, and we have an active Facebook and Twitter page with the same name. So if you're interested in artist in residency programs, TransArtist is definitely your guide, together with other residency-based organizations and databases. And now I would like to talk a bit about the crisis, what we have experienced at COVID-19 and what we've been still experiencing. Actually, I think this made us once again realizing the precarity and vulnerability of the cultural sector, which is not a new thing. And basically, in order to keep the health condition of the society in a good level, of course, we changed the nature of working with all the other sectors as well. And this is a result of the globalization of markets and the whole digital shift in terms of working environments. And this is not necessarily an easy process because, as you can imagine, not every cultural sector or not many organizations have the financial and technical base to achieve this. It's more than technical, it's actually economical. And there is so much to do with the cultural infrastructure at the global and national levels. And this also addresses the lack of policy that has been there forever as well. Because when it comes to culture, we all know that the cultural policy is not necessarily taken seriously, as well as other components of the policy-making processes. And we all know that there's a big lack in those terms. And this has a close relationship with economical dimensions as well. And by this crisis, it only became more vital and visible, and it's, again, nothing new. And also, of course, one of the most immediate reactions of the crisis is limiting the mobility. And it's a very important dimension in the cultural sector, knowing that artistic mobility is a phenomenon in the arts world. And the decrease of the mobility of cultural workers now are affected by the pandemic as well, but it's also not a new thing because the employment, in the nature of applying for a regular visa, there's already a pitfall for the cultural workers because there is this very concrete condition of employment which requires a long-term employment under a concrete under a contract. But unfortunately, this is not available for so many cultural workers. And this again addresses the precarity and vulnerability of our sector. So this got once again limited by a global health crisis. And now we have more reason that limits our mobility. So, for instance, in the picture you see Artist Residency Program located in Sesto al Regena in Italy, and that has been temporarily closed due to the pandemic, and it's not the only one. There are hundreds of them. I just chose this program particularly because we also announced it on our website. And there is another roof organization of artist in residency programs called ResArtists. And it's basically a membership-based organization that most of the artist in residency programs globally are members of ResArtists. And they have started conducting a survey-based study in the spring. And I wanted to summarize the first findings of the first survey finished in May 2020. They still are going on with this research, and I think they will publish a full report after it's done, but it's still an ongoing work. So in the first round, they gathered 1,132 responses, more than 700 from artists, more than 300 from arts organizations, and they almost covered all the continents and important geographical areas like Europe, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, North and South America, Australia, and New Zealand. And what they found out with this research is that airs have been cut short or canceled at many institutions of all levels. Artists and residencies have not fully benefited from governmental aids for various reasons, because as you might know, most of the governments introduced this aid package for the cultural sector, but there were also some preconditions to fulfill in order to benefit from them, and not necessarily everyone, especially residencies, were able to fully benefit from that. And also the question of a roof organization gathering all the residencies program under emerged, because apparently there was the expectation of a sectoral organization to lobby for such a particular aid for the particular sector. Apparently there has not been any concrete solution for that, but there is a good launch. There's a very successful launch of the European program iPortunus, and at the moment the second pilot has been running, and so far more than 300 applicants received minimum 1,500 euros for their application, and at the moment it's planned to spread over 5 calls to spend 500,000 euros. And actually, iPortunus closely works with trans artists, and next week we're running our first workshop for artists and art practitioners to introduce the residency activities under the scheme, and the opportunities can be facilitated for artists and cultural practitioners within the scheme of iPortunus. And the focus on this year is on the disciplines of music, architecture, and literary translation. So if you would like to join or have a look, you can also check the website of Trans Artists that we have a registration open for this workshop. And according to the same study, 54% of all the residency programs got affected. And of this 54, 20% of the residency programs got canceled, and 9% of them are indefinitely closed, which is quite a threatening situation for the arts sector, because this is basically more than half. And of course, immediately the question goes, how about going virtual? Of course, this is the first option for many sectors to be able to conduct their work processes. However, when you look at the nature of the cultural sector, it's not necessarily desired, because again, in the study, 30% of the artists said that fully virtual residencies are possible, while 40% of them said it's better be only physical because the most important dimension of interaction and cultural exchange are missing when the residencies go virtual. And 25% of them think that virtual creation of new artworks are possible. However, the virtual opportunities are only limited to the creation of these artworks. But there is a vast agreement on that networking, professional development, and community engagement dimensions can be achieved through going virtual. And also, of course, there are financial impacts of the pandemic. Fundraising events got canceled. And also residency programs developed the fear of losing government funding. And switching to a digital infrastructure requires a costly investment, and that's also a threat for the residency programs. And the income from different sectors got cut as well, like tourism or renting studio or residential space is not possible at the moment for the health regulations, of course. And in TransArtist, I also run regular reports of our web analytics. I basically check the behavior of our visitors, and I would like to draw a portrait of what has happened in the past year in comparison to the year before. So in 2000, we have a quite a concrete audience, I have to say, because we've been online for a long time, and TransArtist is a known platform for residency programs. Therefore, most of the time, we reach to a concrete number of rates. However, there was a drastic drop for 2020. Normally, the most, so in 2018 and 19, we had more than 2,200,000 page views, and the numbers are pretty close for those 2 years. However, it dropped drastically in 2020 to 1,600,000. And also, as you can see in the line graph, the number of visitors were in between mostly above 30,000 for the year 2019. And for 2020, it started quite high. However, as you see, the biggest drop occurred in March at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was only around 20,000 throughout the whole year. And it basically indicates more than 10,000 of less visitors. And however, content-wise, our website performed more or less the same because, again, we have quite a concrete set of audience who know for what to come to the transartist.org. So it's most of the times for the updates in the open calls, or for the database, which is basically find your residency page. So in terms of the content, we perform more or less the same at transartist.org. However, this is a good portrait of the interest derived from the audience that drastically dropped because there was basically no hope for cultural practice or cultural mobility at that moment. And also, meanwhile, I don't know if you realized, but I came to the realization that there were so many different events or programs focusing on the theme care. And excuse me, I'll have a sip of water. And this was basically a a response towards the crisis, knowing that some agendas should be pushed, and also well-being of the cultural workers are as important as fighting the crisis at the moment. So care in these terms means the care towards the cultural workers and artists. Any discussion, action, or practice to generate well-being across the sector was aimed. This is basically a coping mechanism towards the existing sectoral problems, And we already talked about that. It's mostly rooted in the lack of policy and culture share in economy. And of course, a global crisis, a global health crisis, made the existing situation more unbearable. So I actually gathered some examples of the events around me that put care in the core. For instance, a visual culture platform, Mama in Rotterdam, they recently held a exhibition called On Collective Care and Togetherness. We at Air Platform now conducted a set of symposiums on affecting change, and we talked about care and the systematical issues within the residency sector and how this affected negatively our well-being and working collectively. And V2, it's another platform in Rotterdam. They conducted 2 events. One of them is called To Mind is to Care, and it was basically an exhibition on publishing. And they also conducted discussion sessions called Who Cares? And the Schloss Solitude Mag, based in Berlin, they published an issue on collective care and responsibility. So this also puts care as an immediate response to the crisis that are not taken care by policymakers or the economical infrastructure we're all dealing with. And I'd like to come to a conclusion. And these conclusions are based on different studies. And I wanted to divide the conclusions in 2. Regarding the crisis, UNESCO recently published a report on culture in crisis, policy guide for a resilient creative sector. They highlighted participatory governance in order to push the agenda to make the measures implemented swiftly and efficiently for desired results. And gender equality, although I haven't addressed so far, should be always considered when it comes to aids, measures, and policy changes. It's true because also in the cultural sector, it was also mentioned in another study that there is a dominance of women employees, but I did not include that part in my research. But of course, gender equality is something to be achieved in every sector, every time anyway. So it's good that we have this in our agenda. And free movement of artists should be put in practice. Visa applications of artists is against the nature of their work. And also, we have this recent development that was being talked about yesterday, that there's a possibility to all the European countries to opt in for a free movement agreement for the working force, but it's just too early to talk about that at the moment. I think soon we'll hear more about it. And governance and cultural policy should recognize the shift to the digital age and adapt accordingly. This, of course, means that infrastructure-wise, these sectors should be facilitated more, and their needs should be recognized at the first place so that the relevant policy making can take place. And regarding care, there were 2 studies that were conducted within the arts environment. The first one was in Finland, and based in that particular study, they came to the conclusion that artists with regular working hours, secure employment, ability to control workload, working in one's own field of art, and higher age reported for better well-being, meaning that basically cultural sector also needs the security of the other sectors as well. And although this might seem a bit different than the very nature of the sector, I believe that this is crucial and possible to implement by the effective cultural policy practices. And the late stages of career appear to guarantee more stability and well-being than the more insecure beginning of a career. Basically, this is just the general flow of any career so far. And unfortunately, it's valid for the cultural sector as well, although it looks quite, it might look quite capitalistic to many of you. And gender equality should be always considered during the implementation of aids, measures, and policy changes. And of course, this is relevant for every field and today's issues. And there was another study that addressed the lack of proper research and tools in the cultural sector, that there are not enough objective resources of conducting studies, and more appropriate theoretical frameworks should be built. And by this kind of researches, it's possible to develop more of evidence-based intervention for the population, meaning that by more concrete results derived from more systematical theoretical studies, it might be possible to push the policy-making processes stronger. So these are the conclusions that I arrived in my very own way of working. I hope you found the insights valuable, because again, I did not necessarily conduct the research by myself, but I wanted to gather different resources in order to portray the situation of the artist in residency programs. And I hope this created a little food for thought for everyone in order to consider the sector from this aspect.